Welcome to the Adam Blicker Show, dissecting high performance in tennis.
Hi guys, it has been a while since you last heard from me on this podcast. If anyone is still listening in out there, then please ping me on Twitter. Would love to reconnect with any one of you. It's been almost 2 years since the last episode, and this interview with Kyle LaCroix was actually also recorded quite a while ago, and I'm long overdue in getting it out, but now it's here. So let's get to it. In this episode, you're going to listen to Kyle LaCroix. Kyle holds a master's degree in educational leadership from Stanford University. He is, among a bunch of other certifications, a USTA high performance coach. And last year, he was named USPTA Master Professional, which is the highest achievement rating a tennis professional can hold. On a day-to-day basis, Kyle is running SETS Consulting that specializes in educational tennis solutions. And in this episode, Kyle talks about how we need to adapt and set high standards. He talks about the tricky work-life balance as a tennis coach. And at last, the importance of us considering what kind of legacy we wish to leave behind. Without further ado, please welcome Kyle LaCroix. Kyle, welcome to the show.
Adam, thank you so much for having me.
Kyle, I'm going to get to the very deep end from the very get-go and challenge you. So walk me through the differences between a good coach and a great coach.
I'm sure when you ask a lot of your other guests this question, they're going to have their own personal take, and there's nothing wrong with that, and it's certainly not wrong. There's a lot of anecdotal stuff that you'll find out there, and people will generally comment on, and that's a fair play, and those people aren't wrong, but there is a confluence of traits and qualities that go into the big picture. A little background here. In 2018, I started a Master's of Education program at Stanford University. And my master's thesis was actually on coaching, specifically what athletes experience with great coaching. And so it kind of led me to interview 98 athletes that competed and played and practiced under legendary coaches, talking about basketball programs, football, college, professional, so a very high level. And with these 98 athletes, there were 4 common themes that kind of came into play. Simply put, a good coach can make a significant difference, but a great coach can teach their players lessons that will last a lifetime and be a life-changing aspect in an athlete's life. So the title of my master's thesis was called, It's Not What They Do, But How They Do It, an athlete's experiences in great coaching. I interviewed 98 athletes across 8 sports that played for championship-winning coaches, not just good teams, but the best of the best championship-winning coaches. And I inquired about their experience, and their answers were pretty interesting. The most common answers were 4 specific factors. The first one was that great coaches created a unique learning environment. On or off the court, on a bus or a plane trip, in the locker room, everything and everywhere they were sharing their wisdom, their knowledge. It was always a life or game lesson. And it was the ability to simplify and teach complex ideas and just make it relatable. And they would do that everywhere. I remember there was one athlete that I interviewed. He was a football player, and they were on a bus ride to a game, and they were caught in a blizzard and the bus broke down. And so the coach actually ended up pulling all the players off the bus, and they started running plays in the field next to the road. And it actually helped them in the game because during the game it was also snowing, and they were able to actually do the plays. And so that's really the first one, is a unique learning environment. The second thing is the great coaches put the athlete first. Great coaches protect their players, and they always have their best interest at heart. And it wasn't about the coach's ego or interest. It was about fostering the team environment. The third thing that we found, one of the commonalities, was the coaching standards. Great coaches are holding the team and themselves to a higher standard. It was about creating positive habits and knowing that everyone was on the same page. It wasn't about riding a player hard or being disciplined. It was a matter of understanding that discipline was a matter of holding them to a higher standard, not about a punishment. And then finally, the fourth one was practice. Every practice that a great coach has is purposeful, it's intense, and it's meticulous. And those are really the four common characteristics of great coaching based on athletes that played under great coaching, based on my master's thesis. So in summary, it's not so much what a coach does, but it's how they do it. So all coaches teach, but a great coach teaches details and lessons on and off the court. All coaches communicate, but great coaches communicate honestly. All coaches prepare, but great coaches prepare meticulously. And all coaches have expectations, but great coaches like to see that those expectations are actually met. So that's a long-winded answer, but you gave me a very difficult question right off the bat. So there you go.
Thanks for the answer. And it was actually a very structured answer. And my mind goes to a lot of things when you answer the question. The very first thing about the learning environment and the whole point about not necessarily what we do, but it's how we do it and how we relate our information. I'm curious about, obviously we as tennis coaches, we get to know a lot about different biomechanics of the shots. You can get into a little bit of religion on different things in terms of biomechanics and technique. Do you flick the wrist? Do you not flick the wrist at the end, etc.? And there's probably more ways to roam than one. But I'm curious on your thoughts on, well, there's one way in which we as coaches are taught in terms of gaining biomechanical knowledge about how to do a lot of different things within tennis. But then a whole nother thing is, well, how do we relate that information to the players in a way that they best receive it? And tennis is traditionally a sport that has been taught with technique first. Talk to me about some of your thoughts around how do we actually relate our information the best to the players that we work with?
It's the content, the method, and the quality of the coaching actions more than just one key buzzword or some opinion. It's not some coach's unique opinion or some unique theory that make it. It's based on a lot of the principles, the geometry of the court, the laws of physics, and how you get from point A to point B really doesn't matter as long as you get from point A to point B. And tennis is extremely technical. And there's a lot of repetition-based activities that you have to do. So it's one of those things where a coach has to take not only what they know, but also what the player can do. And they need to be able to match those two things together, because I've seen a lot of instances where a coach is asking a player to do something and they're just not physically capable of it. And I've also seen a coach ask the player to do something where maybe they might not be mentally capable of doing it. So your job as a coach is to take what you have, be able to maximize it, be able to understand it the best you can, and be able to get the most out of that player. All players have strengths, all players have weaknesses, but it's being able to identify that player and working with that. Not everyone's given the same hand. So as a coach, great coaches can adapt. It's not really up to the player so much, it's up to the coach. And then when the coach adapts, a great coach has an amazing ability to get the player to believe that the change they're making is from the player themselves and not the actual coach. It comes down to the coach actually understanding the player, not just on a technical level, but also on a personal level. How do I connect with this player? Because with no connection, there is no direction.
And a little bit of a loaded question, Kyle, out of curiosity. You mentioned also the word adaptable, and the second point in your first answer was also athlete first. I wonder if this is also something generational and something that in our culture has changed, that would, at least being a younger coach, I would have the prejudice that 10, 20, 25 years ago, it was maybe a little bit more my way or the highway in the coaching business, and led a little bit more on authority alone, whereas that might not necessarily work to the same extent anymore. Or have we become a little bit too flexible as coaches? Have we become a little bit too soft as coaches?
I mean, you could certainly make an argument both ways, but I feel like there was a certain generation where the coaches were a little bit more dogmatic in their approach. And don't get me wrong, there's certain times where as a coach you have to be. When it comes to technique, the laws of physics, the geometry of the court are what's going to determine the shot selection and all those things. So you have to be very strict and stern on that. But there's some other things where you have to loosen the reins a little bit. And it comes down to feeling your player, understanding your player. What do they like? What type of personality do they have? I've been with some players and you can be in a 2-hour car ride with them and they won't say a thing unless you initiate. It's one of those things where other players are maybe a little bit more outspoken and they're going to tell you how they feel. Other players might not. They might hold back. So you have to take it as, what type of relationship are you building with this player? What type of relationship does this player even want in terms of you as the coach? Do they want a dictator? And some players actually work better that way. It's about, if you are a great coach, and even coaches of the past, although they might have been a little bit more strict and disciplined, I can guarantee you they loosened the reins when they had to. Great coaches can understand players and they can read players better than just a good coach. So it is a generational thing. It very well could be, but I feel like that generational thing is more about adaptability. And I feel that there's so much more education and so much more content out there for players to be more well informed, where 30 years ago, absolutely, you had to treat a player like this because that's what you knew. That's how you grew up with. And that's also what the player might have grown up with, or the player's parents grew up with. So it was more acceptable. But now that we see the world is changing, social media, everyone has a camera, everyone can record anything they want. I think now there's just a lot more education and information out there to make all of us better.
It's interesting that the third point in your first answer was coaching standards, and you also talked about discipline. And maybe it's wrong to think about it in a way of either or. Probably you can be both adaptable, but you can also foster an environment in which there are certain non-negotiables. There is certain discipline around the way in which you go about your practices.
You need to make sure players know the line. There's a certain line that you cannot cross with certain coaches. My players know what that line is, and I give them free rein to go all the way up to that line. But there's certain standards that are based on communication, based on the relationship. That line can always change sometimes with players. I mean, Phil Jackson did not coach Michael Jordan the same way he coached Dennis Rodman. So it's one of those things where you have to treat everyone fairly, but you don't have to treat everyone the same. Everyone's different. Everyone's on a different journey. And as a coach, you have to adapt to the athlete. It's very hard for the athlete to just adapt to you. It's my way or the highway. It's not really about that. It's our way or the highway. So either you're with the team, you're with us, you buy into this, or you don't. And if you don't, nothing personal, but this isn't for you. Maybe there's another ride for you, but this isn't the ride that you want to be on.
Talk to me about the line in the sand, the standards, the expectations. I have really burned my hands in the past in terms of when and how to communicate those expectations, standards, non-negotiables. They have been type of spoken about, but then they have been tough to then reinforce at a later point in time. So those non-negotiables, those standards, those habits that is a minimum, when and how do we communicate them?
It starts from the very first conversation you have. It comes down to the 3 C's: crystal clear clarity. You have to make sure that the player understands where you're coming from, what you want them to do, and they have to know that you want them to be just as honest and upfront with you. Because if you don't have that honesty between a coach and player, then you really have nothing at all. You have no foundation. So make sure that you have the crystal clear clarity up front. Say, this is what I will allow you to do. This is what I would like you to do. How does this sound? What do you want to do? What are your non-negotiables? And if you can know the player's non-negotiables, then it's a little bit easier because, again, as the coach, you have to be the one that adapts. Because especially at a higher level like the Pro Tour, you are the employee of the player. You were usually at a club level, a lower level, you're pretty much the boss. And so more players will listen to you. They'll do what you want. At the tour level, it's a little bit different. So you need to make sure that you're providing a service. You want to make sure that the player understands, hey, I'm here for you. I'm here to work with you. what do you need? What are your non-negotiables? What are things that you absolutely have to have? And what are things that you absolutely will not tolerate? And that is also a great way to see how serious the player is and to see just how professional they are and how much they really want it. And a player that really wants it is probably going to be a lot more open communication wise and tell you. They might be shy and reserved naturally, but when you ask them that question, they're going to come out and they're going to tell you, hey, I really need this. I want this. I don't really like it when my coach does this. Then you as a coach can always adapt to that. But again, it's the crystal clear clarity. You need to make sure that they are absolutely on board with what you want to do, and you have to be on board with what they want to do. And as long as you do that, then you're going to have some points in between, some resistance. But for the most part, it comes down to those 3 C's.
So the second point was athlete first, and I think that goes into what we're also talking about here in terms of being adaptable, and it's not just going to be my way or the highway. Dragging this in a different direction, and we talked about this before we got on air in terms of a lot of us, could at least talk for my own sake, being someone that struggles with saying no. We are natural helpers. That's also a part of our fix. That's also probably a part of why we do what we do. But then the backside of the medal then becomes also taking care of yourself. So athlete first. I'm not sure a lot of jobs in tennis has the work-life balance that you could sometimes want it to be. So it's a long-winded way of saying I've gotten more and more curious over the years on how do you actually sustainably stay in the tennis coaching business over time? How do we also as tennis coaches make it sustainable and a healthy lifestyle? Because we are taking care of everyone else, but how do we also get to take care of ourselves? And I'd just be curious on your thoughts on how we make it a sustainable career.
I've wondered about this quite some time as well. I ask myself about this every day, but at the end of the day, if you're going to be successful at anything you do, whether you're a tennis coach, whether you're an athlete, whether you're a lawyer, a doctor, an accountant, there's not going to be a great work-life balance. There's just not. You have to put in a lot of things, a lot of hours to get what you want out of it. And there's always going to be a hierarchy too, though, in fairness, right? So what we perceive as valuable to us, which we do have things that are valuable, and we live in a social environment, you're going to have that hierarchy. And there's going to be people out there that do things better than you, and there's going to be a lot of people out there that do things a little worse than you. But at the end of the day, if you really want to be good at something, you're going to have to make some sacrifices. And because of that, your life balance is going to be a little bit off kilter. And there's not one successful tennis coach I know that necessarily has a stable life. That's the deal that we make. Now, you can easily get out of that deal, but we never seem to do it because deep down inside, we have this insatiable, intolerable love for what we do. And there's something to be said about that. Yes, we have our bad days. Yes, we have our long days, but there's something that keeps us coming back for it. It's an addiction to the game. It's an addiction to give back to the sport. And I don't say that in a bad way, but there's a lot of coaches I know that were wonderful coaches that have gotten out of tennis completely, especially when you're working in a club environment like the club industry. It's a heavily influenced service industry. There's a lot of dedication, commitment, long hours. You're dealing with tough membership. It's not easy. It's definitely not easy. But what you get in return, the networking you make, the people you meet, the power you have, I think we as coaches, we get a little bit forgetful about what service we're in. At the end of the day, we're in the service industry. I believe it was Sven Gronveld. He's a mutual friend of ours. I know he talks about, Michelin star service. Mm-hmm. And I couldn't agree with that more. In having grown up in the restaurant industry, my dad owned 2 restaurants. I know all about that. And it's so true. We are in the service industry, but I think it's important to understand too, to make that delineation that we are in the service industry. We are not in the servant industry, right? We still need to be respected, and our time is still valuable. And I think coaches do themselves a disservice when They go off and they undercut their fellow pros. They're going on social media, just kind of going for the next big thing. And we're all part of this together. We're all part of this industry together. So if we can help each other out, but there's a lot of territorial behavior. You will never be successful if you really are committed to that work-life balance, because you have to give a little bit more to be that little extra. The difference between ordinary and extraordinary is that little extra, but it's something that's true. You have to give that little extra, but where do you get that extra from? You have to get it from somewhere. And if you're not getting it from more work, you're getting it from a little bit of your life. So it's tough. I don't know if there is a right answer for that, but I will say that being involved in tennis, being a coach, is one of the most rewarding, most powerful things you could ever do. And if you survey 100 people on the street and you ask them, hey, who was the most influential person in your life outside of your parents? They would probably say a teacher or a coach. They're not going to say my tax attorney or my gastroenterologist. They're going to say a teacher or coach. So because of that, I think although we struggle with the work-life balance, it gets cushioned by the fact that we can make an impact so far beyond what any other occupation can. And when you have a great coach and you ask one of their players, that player will always remember not only the coach, but they will always remember the lessons. And I think even though we have a work-life balance issue, it gets corrected at the end when we leave that legacy, when we can take a player or a student and they can pass on those words of wisdom that we gave them 20, 25, 30 years ago. Then our legacy lives on. So it kind of cushions the blow. It's not easy, but it cushions the blow when we can leave a legacy because we've been a great coach. It's a lot easier for people to look back and say, hey, I remember Adam. He was so good. And I remember the words that he gave me. And those words that he gave me, I'm using today with either my students or I'm using in my own personal life. And that's a little bit of our lasting legacy. So maybe we lack the life balance, but that life balance gets compensated in someone else's life. That's how I try to look at it. Don't get me wrong, I've been burned out many times, but if you try to stay optimistic and you kind of flip the narrative, don't look at it as, well, you're missing these parts of your life. Look at it as how much life you're adding to somebody else.
It's a big responsibility to be a tennis coach. Obviously, we can get into various different cliches, and they will probably say the same in various different sports, that boxing is a vehicle for life, soccer, football is, tennis is a vehicle for life. But it really has the potential to be so much more than forehands and backhands.
It's way more than forehands and backhands. Forehands and backhands are the easiest part.
Talking about a subject in terms of successes and failures and how we can either burn out or we can keep some kind of balance, or maybe it shouldn't be a balanced life. I know that you have been pretty curious over the years on failure. Talk to me about when you realized that you wanted to get wiser on failure.
I think failure is one of those things that we try to avoid. We're so afraid of it. And we have so many experts that are into nutrition and fitness and the physical training and the technique and the tactics and strategy. And those are all things that can help a player, but why not help a player with understanding why they missed or why they messed up in the first place? And if we can have a better understanding of failure, maybe we can then prevent that from happening again, because there's nothing worse than making the same mistake twice. When we go back to it, we look at failure as it's not really a bad thing. It's part of the journey. And if we can look at failure as, hey, this is a lesson learned more than this is the worst day of my life, it can only help us. And this is another project I did at Stanford University. It was actually supposed to be my master's thesis. And then I presented it to my professors and they turned it down only because they said it's not really along the same educational pathway that we're looking for, but it sounds like an awesome idea and we would love to help you. So I ended up interviewing almost 300 professional athletes, and I asked them, what was your biggest failure in your athletic career? And they told me, and it only really came down to 7 things. But the most common reason for failure was the fear of failure itself. So I found that very interesting, and I explored that a little bit more, and it turns out that it becomes this self-fulfilling prophecy where we're so ingrained that, oh, we can't fail. It's all of these things. And really, every athlete I talked to that failed also had extraordinary highs that in that moment, they all forgot about the failure part and they just remembered the success and what got them there. And they're so thankful that they failed because of the fact that they learned from it and it actually made them better. They would not be able to win a Grand Slam, win an NBA title, win a Super Bowl without that failure being a part of their life. We focus so much on all the things that help people win. And I thought, well, that's great, but winning is simply an outcome and that can't really be guaranteed, even if you do everything right. Let's look at that. Let's put that into the equation. And if we can look at that as objectively as possible, we can then say, well, if we know why you failed, maybe we take that away for the next opportunity. When this next opportunity arises, now we know the reason why you were thinking this way or felt that way. Now we can at least be alerted of it. And now we can think, hey, you know what? I now understand and identify and recognize the signs of failure. If I fail again, I'm okay with that, but I'm not going to fail the same way. And knowing that there's only 7 reasons for failure, if we start checking off the list, those reasons for failure now disappear. And now you don't have so many ways to lose. 298 athletes, 39 different countries that were represented, multiple cultures, multiple languages, multiple sports. And yet you would think there would be so many different answers. And there were only 7 answers. Of 289 athletes, and only 7 answers kept reoccurring. So you start to think, well, if there's really 7 reasons and we understand and identify those, maybe in the future, these athletes can start eliminating those as potential areas for losses. Failure definitely has a stigma in our society. We look at it as a bad thing. And what I learned from all these athletes is it wasn't a bad thing at all. At the time, it felt like the end of the world. But really, when they look back, they absolutely needed to have failure. So failure is not a bad thing, but at some point we have to learn from failure. And if we do, let's fail again and let's fail better.
There's something interesting in the semantics around failure, as you're also mentioning it. You can keep hitting to my backhand and I can keep hitting it into the net and make mistakes. I'm not necessarily learning from that. So there's something interesting in, well, how do I then learn? How do I adapt? How do I move on from those mistakes? How do my ego not get in my way? Am I able to be vulnerable enough to actually learn something from that failure? Talk to me about the semantics around failure and how do we move on? Because failure might be a natural part of, first of all, tennis, because it's a game built around mistakes. And if you don't understand that, then you're probably in for a bumpy ride because you're going to have really unrealistic expectations to the experience of competing in tennis. But talking to players about failures and also fostering an environment in which they can develop and learn, well, how do we best shape that learning environment?
I think what's important to understand too is failure isn't the opposite of success. It's part of the success. And as long as you know as many bumps as you have along the road, as long as you can learn about each bump and what caused it, it's going to naturally make you a much better player. And one of the reasons for failure too, I mentioned the number one reason, which was the fear of failure itself. But one of the other reasons was perfectionist. And this football player told me a story about, it was a big playoff game. And by the way, I know you have an international audience, so when I say football, I mean American football. So sorry, I need to put a disclaimer in there. So this American football player was actually warming up before the game, and he was on the field, and he has a very specific warm-up routine. And when he was on the field, he was looking around, he looked in the end zone, and he saw that what he thought, it can't be substantiated, but what he thought was there was one blade of grass that seemed a little bit higher than all the other blades of grass. And this just kind of triggered him. It bothered him, and he couldn't let it go because he's so used to the football field and everything seemed perfect. And for some reason, this one blade of grass was bothering him, and it so threw him off his routine. He had a horrible game. His team lost, and he was still looking and so obsessed with this one blade of grass because it wasn't perfect. And I think it's just important to realize that you can't control everything. You can't control the outcome, whether you play great and you lose or whether you play poorly and you win, which does happen in tennis all the time. It's important to understand that you can only control your effort and you can only control what you're learning about it along the way. So if you fall short, it's okay. I tell all my players, I don't care if you make mistakes, but I want you to learn from those mistakes each time. And I think that's the important thing, is take the pressure off, because they are going to lose. Even the best players in the world lose all the time. So I think it's just an important idea to say that it doesn't have to be perfect. It doesn't have to be a highlight reel. You just have to try your best and try to make the best decisions possible. And if you can do those two things, I am so proud of you. And if you fall a little bit short, it's okay. We can always learn from that. But I think it's important, the whole process of learning. You know, we're so obsessed with the outcome that we forget about it's a process. Every good coach will tell you, trust the process, learn the process. It's so cliche, but it's true. There is a process of development when it comes to learning, when it comes to hitting a forehand, hitting a backhand. It's practice. It takes a really long time, just as long as it takes to master the forehand or backhand. That's how long it'll take you to master the mental game too. It's people don't understand that. They think, oh, okay, I'll talk to this person and they can help me in an hour. It doesn't work like that. You got to put in the time and the effort. You talk to any Formula One driver, they will tell you it's the cognitive abilities, it's the mental. It takes a long time to learn this. So it is a process, but if you give a good effort, if you learn from your mistakes, good things are going to come your way.
Kyle, on that note, tell me the story of the player and the cup of water.
Sure. So back in, what year was it? I think 2014, I was coaching a player. She was based in Miami. And obviously, as tennis players, we like to have control over everything, and sometimes we can't. And when some players can't control everything, they tend to get a little bit negative. They start focusing on all the bad things. And one of the 7 reasons for failure in my research was negativity. In fact, I think that was number 2 behind fear of failure. So I'm coaching this player, and she's playing against a player that is, how can I say, wily. You know, she's one of those players that no one likes to play, getting every ball back, grinding away. Strokes are not the prettiest, but it doesn't really matter. But this opponent of hers is playing at her home club. So she has her coach is there, her family's there, all of her friends are there. The club was not in the best part of town. The courts were not in great shape. Every time my player would miss a ball, the opponent's entourage would be cheering wildly. And so there was just everything that was going wrong could have gone wrong. And it was one of those South Florida afternoons where it looked like it could have poured at any minute. It was 98 degrees with 95% humidity. And it was just a brutal, brutal environment to play in. And my player lost the first set like 6-1, and she was down 4-2, and it was going to be over pretty quickly. All of a sudden, as in typical South Florida fashion, there was a big rain shower. It was the most intense biblical rain shower you would see, and then it's over in 2 minutes. But it was just enough to obviously completely wipe out the courts. And during the rain delay, obviously the players can come over and talk to the coach. And my player kind of came up and was just dragging herself, and her head was down. And she was saying, you know, oh, my opponent's doing this, and these courts are this, and the weather's terrible, and her entourage is saying this, and every possible negative thing that was going on, she noticed it and picked up on it. And so she was thinking I was going to give her some sage old advice, like hit more balls to the backhand, get more first serves in, all these cliche things. And I said, okay, Sophia, here's what we're going to do. When you go back on court, you're going to go to that little igloo cooler. You're going to take one of those plastic Dixie cups. You're going to fill it to the top with water, and you're going to make 2 laps around the court. And your focus is you're not going to spill a drop of water on the tennis court. And she looked at me like I was crazy, which I could very well be, but at this point, it didn't really matter. So she looked at me like I was crazy, and I said, just please trust me on this. Just do it. I'm not going to tell you how to play this, girl. Just do that one thing. So she goes back on court. The court's dry, no time. She goes back on court. She fills up the little plastic or the paper Dixie cup of water. She takes 2 laps around, doesn't spill a drop. She comes back out, plays the match. She wins the second set 7-5. She wins the third set 6-1. And she finishes the match. She walks off the court with her tennis bag and everything. And she's like, I don't know what happened, but that was amazing. How did that happen? And I said, well, I want you to tell me. I mean, I told you to go out there, don't drop any water. Did you notice anything when you were walking with the cup of water? She's like, yeah, when I was so focused on the job, I forgot about all the other things. I didn't think about how bad the court was. I didn't think about the entourage. I didn't think about how my opponent plays. I just knew that I had the tools in my toolbox and I was able to do this. So the moral of the story is sometimes when we're in a negative environment and we can't control certain things, we just have to focus on the task at hand. We have to focus on a job and what we do well and just keep your nose to the grindstone. And if you just focus on the job, a lot of the negativity will just kind of go away. So that's my cup of water story.
I really love the cup of water story. I actually think on a serious note, it tells something very important about our attention and also the importance of us as tennis coaches grabbing the attention of the players and steering it towards something that they actually can control. Obviously, all of us from time to time will be negative. We will be nervous. There will be various different thoughts going on. And no matter how hard we try to change those thoughts or feelings, then we're just going to be in a mess of fighting against our thoughts. But if we can grab our attention and redirect it towards the task at hand, executing our serve, the return, whatever, it very often works.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you have to control the controllables.
Well, Kyle, let me change gears a little bit and go into the rapid fire questions. Obviously, it doesn't need to be rapid fire answers. You are welcome to though, but the questions will be a little bit more rapid fire. So, Kyle, if you could provide yourself with an advice when you first started out as a tennis coach, what would that be?
It's a marathon, not a sprint. I think when you're new in the industry, you're coming out, you want to try to conquer the world, all thrust, no vector. It's one of those things where you're trying to do everything you possibly can and you're excited. And again, it's coming from a good place, but it's a very good way to kind of wear yourself out and spread yourself thin. And also because you're going so fast, you don't stop to not only smell the roses, but also to see other opportunities that are around you. One piece of advice, I think the other piece of advice too, if I could add, is understand the difference between quantity and quality. Quantity is something you can count. Quality is something you can count on. And so I think for me, it was all about the quality. You know, I really wanted to put out a good quality product. And I think that's something I was really lucky with early on. I kind of understood that and I made a commitment to myself that I'm not going to just go and do absolutely everything and teach all the lessons and teach all day. I'm going to teach a quality lesson and I want my last lesson to be as good as my first lesson. And I want to make sure that people can count on me. Death, taxes, and LaCroix. That's kind of the saying around my area. I mean, I'm reliable. People can count on me. If you ask me to do a favor, I'm going to do it. And I'm not just going to do it. I'm going to do it very well. And so because of that, I think my reputation in my area and also within the industry is rock solid. I think a lot of young pros just chase the quantity.
That's actually an interesting perspective because oftentimes quality and quantity is mentioned in terms of practice of players, but it's nice to look at it from the coach's perspective in that way.
Yeah, it has to work for the coach too. You know, I think as coaches, we're some of the biggest hypocrites because we want our players to do this, this, and this, and we want our players to evolve and adapt, and we want our players to improve. But as coaches, what are we doing to improve? Because if our players improve, then they're going to kind of outgrow us. And we need to keep up with the times as well. It's not just the players. So we need to hold up our end of the bargain too. It's only fair and it's only respectful to the players.
Coaches in general, are we better than we used to be at being open and curious? Are we worse? The same?
I think in some ways we've become better. I think we've become better in technology. We've become better in knowing how to shortcut or hack certain things. But I think in other ways we've become a little bit worse in the fact that our egos have sometimes gotten a little bit bigger. I feel like coaches have kind of gone away from the tried and true. We like to label things. We like to get things buzzwords like the modern forehand and all of these different things. And there's nothing wrong with that. But I feel like we still need to keep in mind the laws of physics and the geometry of the court, and that do you need to have something modern? Because if you have something modern, then at some point it's going to become outdated. And so let's look for something that's timeless. Let's look for timeless principles of coaching instead of, hey, this is a new way to coach, or this is the old school way. Instead, let's not put those things in a box and let's not date them and give them an expiration date. Let's look at timeless principles that can last, treating people with respect, following up on emails. To be able to get a tennis coach to reply back to you in a reasonable amount of time is almost impossible. And sadly, it's the state of the industry. It's a marginal industry. You have a lot of people that have spent their entire life in tennis that have only one discernible skill, and that's tennis. And they don't really know much else. They don't have the business sense. They don't have the social graces. They just kind of are one-dimensional. There's nothing wrong with that per se, but at some point, civilization is going to catch up with you. And at some point, no one's going to care about how much you know about a forehand or how well you can hit a forehand. They're going to care about what else you do. What do you give back to society? What do you give back to tennis? What do you give back to the industry? What do you give back to your fellow players, your fellow coaches? And I think also, too, in some ways, we've also stayed the same. I mean, the business model has pretty much been the same since day one, which tells you everything you need to know about how much tennis is progressing. Technology-wise, tennis has progressed quite a bit. In terms of everything else, it really hasn't. So I think the answer is yes, yes, and yes to all three of those. We're the same, we're different, and we've improved. It's really a hard thing to answer. It really is, because everyone is so different, and everyone, again, is on, I don't want to paint with a broad brush. Everyone's on a different journey, but we all have to do our part to make the industry better. And I feel like a lot of coaches do that, but I feel like some coaches are certainly lagging behind.
It was a very nice answer in terms of timeless principles, but also timeless principles that are not only about forehands or backhands. It's also about replying. It's about doing what you say you do, and general things in life as well. I had to pick you up on one thing, though, in terms of timeless principles, because you share your knowledge on social. I gave an example in brief, and I was just judging on your facial expression when I said it in terms of flicking with the wrist at the end of, for instance, a forehand in your ground stroke. Talk to me about timeless principles and flicking with the wrist or not.
Oh, that's like nails on a chalkboard for me. I have a love-hate relationship with social media. I like to get on there. I like to banter. I like to reach out to people. I like to help people engage in conversation. But unfortunately now, with social media and tennis, everyone that has access to a tennis court and an iPhone is now a tennis coach. And it's really concerning to me, because I've seen, in fact, I was just having a conversation with someone the other day. I shared them a video of someone who was swinging at a ball, and then at contact, he was flicking the wrist. And it's so cringeworthy. There's so much bad advice out there, and social media has a lot of good things about it, but as we know, it has a lot of not so good things about it. So I don't post as much as I would like to, because it's not my job to make an algorithm happy. It's my job to make my students and clients better. And I want to do that in the best way possible. We have, at least to me, in my opinion, the way I go about my career, we have a inherent moral obligation to our students to provide them with the best instruction. And there's just a lot of not so great instruction out there on social media. And when I see that it has 800 likes or 2,000 likes, it's a little bit concerning, because now I know there's 800 people or 2,000 people that might take that as gospel. And then what's going to happen is they might go out and try it. They might get injured. They might have a bad experience with it, or even worse, they might not now share that with somebody else. And so I think if you want to be a tennis player, you need a tennis education.
Talk to me about what are you excited about at the moment?
Personally, I'm excited about a lot of things that we talked about off air. But professionally, career-wise, my company, Sets Consulting, specialized educational tennis solutions. I'm making a lot of good headway working with, some pretty big entities right now. But also on a professional note, in September, I'm going to have a really big announcement career-wise for me. I can't announce it yet because the organization hasn't made it public, but in September I'll be sharing some really big news that I'm excited. It's been about 4 decades in the making, so I kind of have to pinch myself for it. But that news will be in September, so that's a little teaser. I can't give that away, but I am looking forward to that. And yeah, just again continuing with Sets Consulting and working with some tour coaches and some players, and just helping other coaches too. Just like what we talked about, helping coaches get better in their careers, becoming even more professional, getting better jobs, learning tennis the right way. Again, getting a tennis education.
What have you changed your mind about the last couple of years?
On-court coaching. If you would have asked me about on-court coaching 10 years ago, I would have just walked away. It would have been like the flick of the wrist for me. But as I've gotten a little bit older, a little bit wiser, a little bit more mature, there are some benefits. I would like to see on-court coaching in some shape or form on tour, but I don't think in the way that it currently is acceptable. I'd like to see a higher level of it. I'd like to see a little bit more professionalism. I don't know how to fix that. I don't know what the answer is. So it might sound like I'm just whining right now because I don't have a solution. But I just think the current form might not be the best, but I would be more open to it. I'm not going to say I'm all for it now, but I'm definitely more open to hearing other people's side of the argument. Whereas before I was a bit ignorant and just completely shut it down. But now I'm a lot more open and curious as to the other side of the argument, as well as what people's own opinions and perspectives of it are. So I guess that means I'm somehow evolving.
And let me throw myself a little bit under the bus here then. To me, I'm really happy about 1.0, but I also feel it's a little bit half pregnant. Either do it fully, so they are mic'd up. It's an experience for the crowd, for the spectators, a part of the circus, being translated. So if someone is speaking in Italian, then for myself, I would not be able to understand in the native language. But on the other side, it would be really a shame if someone could not speak their native language to their player in order to coach them best. But a 2.0 where it's also a spectator experience and we get some insights there would, for me, if you go that route, I'm completely fine that we don't have it. But if we do, I'd like to double down on it personally.
And to add to your point, I'm with you there. I feel like one of the greatest advantages of tennis is that you're out there on your own. And it is a mental battle and you have to solve the problem. I think the on-court coaching is really how the player handles themselves in a tough situation. That's where you see the on-court coaching, not so much when the coach is on the court, but what the coach does on the practice court and then how that translates over. But if we do it, I would like to see it all out. And I would like to see it from an educational perspective for not only the fans, but for other coaches at home that are trying to help their players. And that's why I feel like it should be done of a higher quality, a bit more professional, not in its current state. I feel like either we keep the Band-Aid on or we completely rip the Band-Aid off. And that's really the only way to do it. And people, whether they like it or not, they're going to get used to it. It's just like a couple of years with the line calling system with Hawkeye, right? People are like, oh, there has to be a human element in the lines people. But now Hawkeye, and no one even questions it. So it has to be where you just got to rip the Band-Aid off if we really want to do it.
What do you consider the biggest waste of time or the biggest myth in tennis?
Well, I mean, we can go away from the technical stuff. I think one of the biggest wastes of time is the GOAT debate, right? The greatest of all time with the big three. I think we are so blessed and we should be so grateful to have these three playing in our lifetime that we get to witness all of this. I mean, what is it, 62 Grand Slams between the three? I mean, how great is that? And you can't really debate the greatest of all time, because if there's one sport that has changed the most, it's been tennis. The technology has changed. The rules have changed. The court surface has changed. I mean, how good would Djokovic or Nadal be if you gave them a wooden racket? You know, how many Grand Slams would Roger win if 3 or 4 Grand Slams were played on grass, which they used to be? How many? What's the other one? I'm trying to think, but oh yeah, you know, how fast could Djokovic, Federer, Nadal serve if their feet could not leave the ground? Because that was also a rule. Your feet could. So there's so many, and you know, with the string technology and everything else, with the grass courts being a little bit slower, there's so many things that have changed, and it's unfair to compare eras. It's unfair. I mean, I would have loved to have been around to watch Rod Laver, or to see, you know, Borg and McEnroe. I was born in '82, so I just missed it. But it's one of those things where let's just respect these players for how good they are. And everyone at that level is so good. And so I think when people get on the bandwagon of, you know, one of the big three, it's like, come on, like you're never going to know. You're never going to have the answer. You can do statistics and everything else, but it's just, let's just appreciate what we have. And when all three are gone, you know, it'll be a very sad day for tennis, but we got to start arguing with that. And then I think the other thing is, you know, great players don't always make great coaches. I think that's the other thing that they're like, oh, well, you know, so-and-so played here and so-and-so played. I'm like, well, who did they coach though? Who did they develop? What relationship do they have with their players? I think that's another thing, or like a big myth that kind of, yeah, there's a lot of great players that make great coaches too. But, you know, being a tester and certifier for the USPTA, I certified over 1,500 coaches in America. And I can tell you there were a lot of great players that didn't do so well as a coach. They didn't do very well on the test. And it's kind of tough. But, you know, sometimes as great players, we don't always see eye to eye with a player who's struggling, because you never struggled as a player. It just kind of came to you. So walking over to a player and say, hey, hit your backhand just like this, it doesn't really resonate with them. You got to kind of get to their level. And again, you got to have that connection. So I think that's probably the other one too.
What do you yeah, you already, now I'm mixing up questions. What is the most valuable lesson you learned being in the world of tennis?
Tennis is a very small world. Everyone seems to know everyone, and if they don't, they know someone that knows that person very well. I get resumes across my desk every week, and all I need to do is look on the references or look where they worked, and chances are I know someone that has worked there, or, you know, that knows someone that, I mean, it's so small. But a big part of my reason for where I am now in Boca Raton at a private club is because I interviewed for this club three different times, and they weren't going to hire me. I was way too young. I was fresh out of college. I had no connections with Boca Raton, South Florida. And the person that was doing the hiring tossed my resume in the trash. And when my resume went to the trash, it flipped to my references page. And on my references page, there was the name of a gentleman who I worked for the summer prior. And that gentleman happened to be the same person that got this hiring manager involved in tennis. And they haven't spoken in 30 plus years. So this hiring manager says, oh my goodness, I haven't seen this name in 30 years. I need to call him. So they had a chat for like 45 minutes. And finally at the end, my former employee says, by the way, how come you're calling me? And the hiring manager says, oh, you know, I got your number from the resume of this guy, and we're not going to hire him. He's too young and no connections, and he's great, but you know, he's just not ready for this job. And my former employer said, well, who is it? And they said, well, it's Kyle LaCroix. And my former employer said, oh my goodness, he was the best intern we ever had. You have to hire him. We offered him a job and he turned us down. You have to hire him. He was the best. And the rest is history. So the tennis is a very small world, and just make sure that if you're going to get caught doing the right thing.
That's a good line to finish on. What are the things that you believe that everyone else think is crazy?
I think that serve and volley will make a comeback. I did probably my opus in my career was this 7-part serve and volley series I did for a tennis website called tennisplayer.net. And I did this whole 7-part series on the mentality of it, the strategy of it, different drills and games to work with players. But I do think serve and volley will come back. I don't think it'll come back in the form that we remember, like Edberg and Becker. I think it'll be maybe a serve and a swinging volley. But I think it's a way to neutralize great returners. It was only 20 years ago where tennis was talking about, oh, tennis is dead because you have Sampras and Ivanisevic and Rafter, and all the points are going no more than 3 shots, and it's so boring to just watch. And then all of a sudden, the very next year after Rafter and Ivanisevic in 2001, it was Hewitt and Nalbandian in the Wimbledon final. And now all of a sudden, there's been such an emphasis on the great returns. Djokovic, the best returner in the world. And so I think tennis just kind of goes in phases. And I think to neutralize the great serving, obviously the players had to get better at returning. And now I think to neutralize great returning, the players are going to have to go back and do something else. So it's just very cyclical. And I think serve and volley could definitely make a comeback. I think a few other things might have to change as well, like the way coaches actually teach tennis and teach volleys and that. But I would like to see serve and volley come back, and I'm still beating my drum. And anytime I go to a coaches conference, people roll their eyes and say, oh, here's a serve and volley guy, but I do believe serve and volley will make a comeback in some form. Probably not the old school serve and volley that so many people remember, but maybe it's something new like a serve and the big swinging volley.
It's interesting. Roger talked a few years back at Wimbledon about the importance of serve and volley, and I also believe, you probably know this better than myself, but I do believe a guy like Craig O'Shaughnessy bringing in tennis is also, when looking at it from a statistical standpoint, arguing that it actually makes sense to play more serve and volley. So we might see some more Maxime Cressys in the near future.
I would not be complaining in the Wimbledon ladies semifinal with Ons and Tatiana. What an amazing match. I mean, there was some serve and volley, there were some drop shots, there were some short angle volleys. It was lovely to see, but Craig O'Shaughnessy has so many great stats on the serve and volley. And I remember we actually did a workshop together in Maryland back in 2016, and he gave a presentation on some of the new statistics for tennis. And I actually followed him right up, and we didn't plan this, but I followed him right up with a whole serve and volley demonstration and seminar on court. So it was actually like the perfect Stockton to Malone set up, the assist and the dunk. But I mean, it really worked well together. But no, Craig does a wonderful job. And I just think it's time for tennis to start sort of evolving. And I think the more players see someone like Cressy, you become a disruptor. It's not about what you like to hit. It's about what your opponents don't like to hit. And nobody likes to really face a serve and volley or too much. In fact, I think Djokovic and Andy Murray went on Instagram Live and they talked about, I might even have video of it, I can send it to you, but they went on Instagram Live together chatting, and they were talking about how the players they don't like to play are the ones that come to the net. And I'm thinking to myself, here are like 2 of the best players in the world, and they're sharing this public knowledge that, hey, we don't like it when you come to the net against us. And yet somehow people don't. And it's just very frustrating to see, because you have players that are just dominating the game right now, which good for them, but they're dominating the game because everybody plays like them. So if you're 1% better than everybody else and everyone plays the same, well, that 1% is going to make a big, big difference.
It's also another interesting aspect in what you're saying in terms of switching the focus from my own strokes to how can I make it difficult for the opponent. But there's a whole nother emphasis tactically than necessary the biomechanics, technical aspect of how to hit your forehand or your backhand.
Yeah, I mean, listen, stroke technique is very important, but sometimes if you have a history of teaching at a level where they're not going to be professional, you have to think of new ways to teach the game. And so many people are concerned about, oh, well, I have to hit this perfect shot. And really, it's just a way to take pressure off of your player and say, listen, you don't have to hit the perfect shot, but find out what shot they don't like to hit. And you can do that in warm-up. Within 10 seconds, you should know what shot do they like to hit, forehand or backhand. Do they have an extreme grip? Do they like high balls? Do they like short? So you can start to formulate. And yes, it makes life so much easier if you have great technique, but not everybody is blessed with that. And not everybody has worked as hard on that. So there's other ways to win matches. And sometimes you have to pull them down to your level more than put pressure on yourself to raise your level.
What person or book has inspired you the most as a tennis coach?
Talking about the failure part, I think Nick Bollettieri, My Aces, My Faults. It's an older book, but I think it's a great book because it shows a little bit of vulnerability, and it shows that he worked with these players, but he also had some missteps and he made a few mistakes. And he talks about making mistakes with Becker and making mistakes with Haas and making mistakes with Philippoussis and making mistakes with Mary Pierce. And I just think that's, as coaches, you always hear about all the success stories, but I think it's important to also hear about the mess ups and the mistakes. I mean, I've made tons of them as a coach, and I'm so grateful for that because I learned from them, and that's what's made me better. So I think that book, My Aces, My Faults by Nick Bollettieri. And I also think just a little bit more cerebral, A Brief History of Time by Stephen Hawking. It just kind of puts everything into perspective in terms of it's just tennis. There's so many more important, more powerful things out there. We are so blessed and grateful to be able to play this game. And the fact that we are on a giant rock, spinning at 11,000 miles per hour, hurtling through space at 68,000 miles per hour, going around a giant gas fireball that is going to swallow us in a couple billion years. Hitting a backhand on break point really isn't that big of a deal. I mean, we really have to just take it all in and say, listen, okay, maybe I played bad today. Maybe I lost. I still got to play tennis, and it's still good. I still get to go home. I still get to say hi to my family. I still get to do all these other things. And guess what? No matter how bad I play today, there's always tomorrow.
I think that's a wonderful place to finish up. I would love for you to Carl, just share for everyone listening in how to best figure out more about you, how to follow what you continuously put out there. Where can people get even more information about you? Sure.
Thank you, Adam. So they can reach me on my website, www.setsconsult.org, SETSCONSULT.org. You can also follow me on social media if you dare. Instagram is at sets_consulting. Twitter is the same handle at sets_consulting. And then also my private social media account where I kind of just post my own personal stuff and family things is Instagram is at tennis_tycoon, and on Twitter, which is my favorite medium, at tennis tycoon. So you can reach me in all those places, and please visit my website. You can kind of see everything that we do there, and if there's any way that I can give back and help anyone that's listening, I am more than happy to do so.
Thanks, Carl, and I really appreciate your time doing this. I know that there's plenty of things to do. You're sort of the guy. Anything that you'd like to add that we missed throughout this interview before we push the button and end the interview?
No, I think this interview was great. Had a lot of fun. Thank you for your time as well. And I know we've been in connection and communication the last couple of years, so I just want to say thank you for your support and your friendship. I know we've exchanged some personal emails as well. We won't get into those, but I will say that it's good to meet someone that has a lot of the same principles, the same standards. So it's just nice to know there's someone out there and there's someone in Denmark. So there you go.
Fantastic. Thanks a lot, Kyle. I really appreciate it.
Awesome, Adam. Thank you so much.
I hope you found the listen worthwhile your time. If you did, tell a friend about the episode, and if you haven't already left a review on iTunes, I hope you'll consider leaving an honest review in order to help spread the wise words of the guests on the podcast. Have a great day.